And we're back. Greetings, everyone. This is Lucian Vâlsan, broadcasting from Cluj-Napoca, Transylvania. As always, alongside with me is Herr Jon Gunnarsson, broadcasting from Deutschland, and our producer, James Huff, sitting in the background, making sure everything works just fine, and broadcasting from the US. Greetings, Jose Gunnarsson. What's up?
Good evening. We do have a lot of news today.
Yeah, we do. Well, that's why it's the news hour at the end of the day.
Yeah. Some of it is good news, some of it is just insane. But yeah.
To be fair, it's pretty much in the note of this show. I mean, most of the time we have some of it good news, some of it insane. Other than that, how's been the weather lately?
Yeah, pretty normal, honestly. I mean, it's sort of not very warm, but it's not too cold either. It's just fine sort of autumn weather.
Yeah, well, today I celebrated the first day when I saw the sun. It's been almost a week. It had been almost a week since I hadn't seen the sun. It rained for almost the entire weekend, and then it rained again on Tuesday, and it was cloudy for most of the week. And today, after the noon, the sun was finally visible, and actually it got quite warm, around 24 degrees at 2 p.m. Not bad at all, given that it's early October already.
Yep.
Yep. Okay, then I guess we should go on and roll up with the news. Starting with the insane ones, I guess. The first one coming from the Telegraph. Oxford University Student Union bans Free Speech magazine because it's offensive. Student journalists at the University of Oxford were dismayed to find out that their magazine, which promotes free speech, was banned from a freshers' fair because the students' union was worried people would find it offensive. Vâlsan News, another student publication at the prestigious university, reported that the magazine No Affairs was banned from being handed out to new students during Freshers' Week. The magazine was founded by a third-year philosophy, politics, and economics student, Jacob Williams, and Oxford local Luli Tannett, and the aim of the magazine is to promote free speech and provoke debate. They say that No Offense was set up to promote debate and publicize ideas people are afraid to express. It grew out of popular discussion forum Open Oxford, which has more than 2,000 members, and submissions to the magazine have been open all summer. The magazine was sent to the student union censors so they could check whether it was appropriate material for the freshers to read. The union said in an email, quote, "Having reviewed the material, we have decided it will not be suitable for this publication to be distributed at Freshers' Fair. This decision is based on Regulation 13 of the Student Stallholders Regulations, which is attached. Regulation 13 states, quote, Oxford University Student Union reserves the right to remove any materials or prevent any activity that may cause offense," end of quote. Jacob Williams told Vâlsan, "There is nothing offensive about healthy debate. To ban us from promoting it on the grounds that people might be offended proves everything the free speech movement has been saying. No offense, OUSU, but you just shot yourself in the foot." A representative from the union told the student paper why they banned the Free Speech magazine. "We at OUSU do not wish to have an event which is intended to welcome new students to Oxford associated with a publication making light of racism, sexual violence, and homophobia in an attempt at satire. The Freshers' Fair is one of Oxford University Student Union's most widely attended events, and while Open Oxford are entitled to book a stall and distribute their publication elsewhere, we chose to withdraw their permission to distribute the publication. Oxford University Student Union exists to represent and enhance the lives of all Oxford students, and given that Freshers' Fair is for new students, we do not wish to subject them to the offensive views of a minority which are present in this publication. Such views are in no way representative of Oxford students as a whole. As whole. I guess they don't no longer teach English grammar. Anyway. This news comes after the University of East Anglia banned a restaurant from giving free sombreros to students because they are offensive to Mexicans.
So I have a question. What if I am offended by them banning this magazine?
Well, that's a conundrum right there. You have to be. I don't know. I guess you'll have to subject that to a vote.
Oh, I think I can sort of imagine the answer. It's that because I'm a privileged white male cishet sex um, and all that, my opinion probably doesn't count.
Yeah, you don't have enough oppression points to.
Yeah.
But then again, you have immigrant background from outside the
Oh
European
yeah,
Union.
yeah, right.
So there you go.
So I guess I do have some sort of victim points there.
In all seriousness, this one with sombreros is actually even more insane than the ban
Yeah.
of this magazine. I'm wondering how many fucking Mexicans could be at Oxford at any moment at any given moment. Maybe 10, maybe 15.
Yeah, it's like how is giving away free sombreros offensive to Mexicans? I don't understand that.
Well, by that standard, I should probably contact my Romanian friend at the Oxford and tell him to advocate to ban the Dracula book from being read in Oxford because it's offensive to Romanians. See how that works.
Yeah, probably.
I mean, seriously, come on. What's wrong with giving free sombreros? They're funny.
Also, I'm going to claim that as a German, I find it offensive whenever anyone gives out free beer because that's obviously
Absolutely.
our national drink. So you can't just dishonor that by giving it away for free.
It's not just offensive to German, but it's offensive to Irish people as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, and given the history between England and Ireland, that's the double oppression right there.
Yeah.
But then again, I mean, the folks from this particular magazine, they hit the nail in the head when they said, well, the student union just shot itself in the foot. I mean, congratulations, you just banned a magazine talking about how there is no free speech in the area.
Yeah.
And it goes back to the discussion that we've had of multiple times on this show. Why the hell do the student unions even exist in the first place? And if they exist, why the hell do they have so much power?
Yeah, I just find this sort of whole attitude really pathetic of wanting to protect people from offensive points of view. It's just kind of sad.
It is sad, but I'm thinking, I mean, if I were the president of the university, I would either ban the student unions altogether, or if not, I would consider that they should only have the power to, I don't know, let's say, negotiate with the university administration, I don't know, the allocation of various rooms for various events or things like that. They should not have the right to censor anyone for any reason.
Yeah, so I'm not entirely clear on what actually happened there. So from part of the article, it sounds like they've just banned this magazine. In other parts, it sounds like they've just prohibited them from giving out this magazine at this particular event held by the student union. So I'm not actually sure what exactly they've done here. The article
Yeah,
isn't quite clear on that.
yeah, I asked around on Facebook, and a former Oxford student told me that essentially, if they invoked Regulation 13, it means it's banned all over the campus. And when
Okay.
they say there that well, they can get a booth elsewhere. By elsewhere, they mean off campus.
Okay.
So yeah, if what that person told me is correct, then I guess it's banned all over the campus. But even if it's not, still, let's not give this to freshmen because they would be subjected to offensive. What? I mean,
Yeah, I
shouldn't
mean,
that be the purpose of your first days in university? Yeah, welcome to an open forum of ideas.
once upon a time you went to university to be exposed to new ideas and
Yes.
not just to sort of boring old ideas or sort of boring accepted ideas, but sort of um, radical ideas that sort of push the boundaries of what is sort of acceptable in society. But now you can't even hand out sombreros.
Yeah. Yeah. Yep. 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 I mean, I don't know. Again, yeah, it should be, or it is, or yeah, it used to be the purpose of the university to be exposed to radical ideas and to new ideas. And I don't know what's been said and what's been written into that particular magazine. Maybe
And
it was something. Go ahead.
I mean, people are still exposed to radical ideas, but they're just exposed to this one particular set of radical ideas and nothing else.
Yes, yes, that's a fair point as well. But again, I don't know what was written in this particular magazine. Maybe it was something making light of racism and whatnot. But I'm like, so fucking what?
Yeah, that's just like don't read it then.
Yeah, don't read it. The special snowflake intensifies. The second one, coming also from the Telegraph, is essentially a continuation of the special snowflake mentality being made into policy. Uh, the Telegraph, well done feminism, now men are afraid to help women at work. A new book claims that male office workers are now so afraid of being on the receiving end of a sexual harassment case that they are reluctant to mentor, assist, befriend, or even hold open doors for female colleagues. Crushingly, Sex and the Office suggests men now view such ordinary, decent behaviors as too risky, and in what will be a bitter irony for equality campaigners, claims that as a direct consequence, women are now failing to advance at work. This terror of being accused of sexual harassment is now so common it has its own term, backlash stress. It sounds like something straight out of a Claims Direct ad where the only victims are men. The book's author, Kim Elseser, I think, a research scholar at the University of California, argues that a sex partition has sprung up which impedes women from building the vital network of contacts both within the workplace and socially. And the author should know about tough working environments. She's a former equities trader at Morgan Stanley. Tellingly, Elsesler adds that companies themselves are contributing to this mess as they are now so terrified of legal action that they send staff on sexual harassment training courses and are duty-bound to follow up on any allegation, however minor. Ludicrously, Elsesser cites examples of men who have been dragged in by their HR departments for simply opening a door for a female colleague or complimenting her on a new suit. Stories like these spread around workplaces, instilling a fear that innocent remarks will be misinterpreted, she says. Well, no shit, Sherlock. Of course, despite the fact that it is men who are getting the rough end of the pineapple here, this is all being painted as officially bad for women as they are failing to get on. A phrase involving cake and eat it leaps to mind, although don't repeat it at work as you'll probably be frog marched to HR for fat shaming. In a lawsuit-happy culture where claims can seemingly be made on a he said, she said basis, men are now trying to ensure their actions are always covered by a third-party witness. Increasingly, they want to make sure the walls have ears just in case something inappropriate is said. How sad. And honestly, who's got the foggiest clue about where inappropriate even begins these days? Holding open a door, saying nice dress, smiling, making eye contact? By carrying on like this, we are nurturing and mollycoddling a victimhood, and it is having profound impacts. Last month in Britain, fearless feminist barrister Charlotte Proudman publicly shamed Alexander Carter Silk, 57, a senior solicitor, for complimenting her stunning LinkedIn profile picture, then claimed it was her career that had been ruined. Amid this poisonous smog of mutual mistrust and increasingly contempt, is there any wonder men are becoming fearful of female co-workers? Above all, Sex and the Office is proof, if any were needed, that the Great Workplace Equality Project has spectacularly backfired. Who precisely wins if men are terrified of lawsuits and women are falling behind as a consequence? In this toxic, paranoid environment, women will never be trusted as advisors. They will be frozen out of networks or, increasingly, create their own women-only networks, which on the surface promise advancement, yet deep down increase gender separatism. Would the single-sex workplaces of the 1940s be safer for all? This is the bed third wave feminism has made. Now we all have to lie in it, wide awake, hearts racing, eyes wide open, waiting for the lawyers to come hammering at our doors. Is that our collective future, a one called fear and loathing in human resources? How can we make this waking nightmare end? Well, I think I may have some ideas on how to make the nightmare end, but yeah, please go ahead.
So I believe this article is overall correct, but it really overstates its case. Like, yeah, sure, these sort of laws this do happen, but they're still very rare, and I wouldn't say that it's anywhere uh, close to accurate today to say that all men are just live in a constant fear of being accused of sexual harassment. I think that that's very much overstated, though there's, of course, a core of truth to that.
Hmm. Well, what I think this article lacks is a bit of nuance. I mean, yeah, he starts from
Yeah.
the book Sex and the Office, and right from the title of the book we see that it's about the office. So it's essentially a particular kind of workplace that is particularly affected by this particular phenomenon. Because, yeah, you're right. I don't think this is a problem in, I don't know, let's say carpentry workshops or things of that nature. There is only a particular subset of workplaces that are particularly affected by this. And I'm thinking this, I don't know, let's say in IT, in corporate America, in corporate Britain, in between lawyers, that kind of workplaces in which, let's face it, a very tiny minority of the total population works.
Yeah, but I mean, I think even in those workplaces, it's not quite as bad as portrayed in this article.
I don't know. I mean, in the U.S., I can believe that it's bad and it's worse than in Britain in the U.S. And the reason why I'm willing to believe such an assertion is because the U.S. has this litigation culture where you can sue anyone for everything under the sun, no matter how idiotic it sounds. You do still have a chance of having an actual lawsuit. Uh, it's not like in Europe. I mean, in Europe, for instance, I can't sue the manufacturer of my coffee mug because it didn't write on it, don't try to swallow it. But you can do that in the United States. That's why you have a lot of insane warnings on the various clothes, such as, I don't know, when you wash this t-shirt, make sure to pull the child out of it. Yes, that's a real warning. Because someone actually did that and sued the manufacturer and won. So yeah, I mean, I can definitely believe that the problem exists in a far worse state in the U.S. than in Britain or in France or in Germany. I can definitely believe that, and I think that's partly, of course, the fault of these insane sexual harassment laws and policies and whatnot. But part of it is the fault of the overall litigation culture that exists in the United States that we Europeans simply cannot understand.
Yeah, I think that is definitely a big problem in the United States. Um, it's also somewhat coming to Europe, but not nearly as widespread yet. And this in particular about sexual harassment, I think it's just a case of people being very overzealous in applying these kinds of policies, and these policies being so vague that they can be easily applied to totally innocuous situations. And at fear of beating a dead horse, the primary culprit there is, of course, feminism.
Hmm.
Uh, because there's constantly this narrative of women being victimized and so on, and you need to have some sort of explanation for the whole glass ceiling and so on. And this sort of thing is a convenient sort of is a that is sort of a convenient explanation that you can use to explain all sorts of ills, and um, it's sort of difficult to promote moderation in this area, because then you're immediately accused of being a sexism apologist and all that, and that is a situation that not many politicians, not many business people want to find themselves in. So they just
Hmm.
nod and go along with whatever these feminist lobbies demand.
Hmm. Hmm. And another perverse incentive is that if you win the lawsuit, you're entitled as a victim to quite a significant amount of money. It was recently the case of a hedge fund manager or something like that who was sued by his former Swedish secretary for sexual harassment. Now, she couldn't prove jack shit, but she convinced a jury that she felt stressed. And because she felt stressed.
Wow, she felt stressed at work.
Yeah,
Oh my God.
Yeah, who
The
could
poor darling.
Yeah, the poor darling. Well, the poor darling is now entitled to something like $5 million because she felt stressed. And now the hedge fund manager, the defendant, has launched an appeal. I don't know if he'll win, but if he loses the appeal, he's gonna have to pay the Swedish cunt $5 million because she felt stressed.
Yeah, I mean,
So,
like
and
$5 million is
it's
if
unreasonable. Yes.
there would be a reasonable compensation is that if, I don't know, he had tortured her or something and
Yeah.
torn off some of her limbs maybe, but for making her feel stressed. I mean,
Yeah, and again, yeah, but you see, these kinds, you can demand as many reparations as you want, and in some U.S. states, not all of them, the reparations are also calculated depending on how much the defendant can afford. And since the guy is a hedge fund manager, you can imagine he can afford this ludicrously high amount. And yes, I do agree with you. I mean, 5 million would be appropriate for, I don't know, torture, things like that. But yeah, so he's gonna have to pay probably, unless he wins the appeal. And these kinds of things create perverse incentives, just like in the UK, where people who make rape allegations are entitled to £10,000, and then if the allegation is proven to be false, even if proven in court to be false, even if you get prosecuted for filing a false allegation and you lose the trial, you don't have to pay them back. So it creates this kind of perverse incentives to have them. And this is, again, I mean, feminism is at fault for promoting it, but the laws don't make it better either. In France at least, you don't get compensation. But in France, the mentality is, well, she felt harassed, therefore it is harassment, but the defendant will have to pay a fine to the state, which makes perfect sense. I don't know how, but it does make sense because Orlan says so.
yeah, I mean it creates a deterrence and it keeps people from committing these terrible offenses.
Yes,
Like
and
it's the same logic as, you know, punishing people with imprisonment, for example, for doing some sort of crime. That also doesn't help the victim, but it's sort of it's a punishment that serves to deter from this sort of action.
yeah, okay, fair enough. But then again, I don't know which system. I mean, both are bad, the one in the US and the one in France, but I don't know which one is worse. The litigation, the civil litigation that can end in reparations worth millions, or the one in France where the victim has no monetary incentive but can still end in financial ruin for the defendant. I don't know. I don't know which one is worse.
Yeah, both are crazy.
Both are crazy, and in France it's actually slightly crazier because you as a defendant can end up with having criminal record because it's considered a felony. You can actually go to jail for sexual harassment for up to 2 years. It hasn't happened yet, but people have been fined under that particular piece of legislation. And the problem with the law is that it has no objective standard. I mean, if she says she was harassed, then that's it.
Yeah, I mean, thankfully the laws in Germany are a lot more reasonable in that regard, in that you can sue for these sort of things, but usually the kinds of the amounts of money you can get is, you know, a few thousand, maybe a few tens of thousands, but never millions.
Yeah, it's the same thing here, but you also have to prove it. I mean, it's just like in any other scenario. You have to prove. So you have to have video
Yeah.
recordings or, I don't know, a lot of witnesses, things like that. That's the procedure for now in here. And again, the reparations you can get is probably a few €1,000, maybe a few tens of thousands at worst. If you can prove, I don't know, let's say harassment over periods of years or something like that, maybe. But it's coming. It's coming to us. Okay, let's go to the next one. Oh, no. This, why me? I should have passed this article to you. The Guardian. Of course it's from The Guardian. And no, it's not from Jessica Valenti, though it could be. Why I was sweat-shamed as I waited for my coffee at Starbucks. I was ordering coffee when I noticed a well-dressed woman staring at me. You look like you just did a class, she said, giving me the once-over. I had no idea what she meant, so I said nothing. Or swimming, she offered with a tight smile. Oh, that. I just ran 12 miles and the hair sticking out from under my hat was wet. It took me a moment to formulate an answer. Running, I mumbled finally. I just sweat a lot. I took the paper cup of drip coffee and hustled past the condiment bar. Screw the half and half. I'd drink it black. Once safely inside my car, I threw off my damp running cap and flipped up the hood of my sweatshirt in embarrassment. I wanted to dive deep into that Lululemon scuba and never come back up for air. Eventually, the caffeine kicked in and it hit me. I had been sweat-shamed. Sweat-shaming is when someone points out your sweatiness as a way to signal disapproval. Like its counterparts, slut-shaming and fat-shaming, sweat-shaming is aimed mainly at women who are actually not supposed to sweat at all. Horses sweat, men perspire, and women glow, as the saying goes. I glow like a nuclear reactor. My body cools itself exactly as I need it to. After long, hard runs, my fair, fine hair sometimes ends up dripping wet. I bring dry clothes to throw on afterwards and try to forget about it, until somebody reminds me. Strong may be the new sexy and fit may be the new skinny, but sweaty is as gross as ever. To sweat like a pig is to be fat, dirty, uncivilized. Nobody wants to fall into this category, so we attempt to conceal our perspiration, something I'd tried but failed to do at Starbucks. Rather than challenge sweat-shaming, I played right into it, conceding that I sweat a lot. But do I, really? We have been hiding this natural bodily function so long, we have no idea how much a normal woman sweats, if there is such thing, much the same way many men have no idea how much makeup it takes to produce natural beauty. Cue the Amish Schumer if you don't believe me. If you doubt me, sir. Now, instead of just concealing sweat, we may opt to stop it entirely. A flurry of recent trend articles describe how some women are getting Botox injected into their scalps to keep their heads from sweating, thus preserving their blowouts through intense soul cycle sessions. Pharmaceuticals may one day liberate us from perspiration, but what if instead we choose to be liberated by it? In her book, The Female Grotesque, feminist theorist Mary Russo explains how throughout literature, the image of the open, protruding, secreting body stands in contrast to archetypal female beauty and might offer a way to subvert it. Open, protruding, secreting, this sounds a lot like the body of a woman running. Literature's crones and bearded ladies may have been onto something, but it would be nice if women could exercise their freedoms without being regarded as freaks. If I were to reimagine the sweat-shaming incident as a music video, it would play out like this. A spotlight comes down, maybe a disco ball. Baristas dance back up around me. I don't think you're ready for this, sweaty. I belt out to the tune of Bootylicious. It's just a fantasy, but it helps me see how I might react differently. I've got another long run this weekend, and afterward I'm going to sit down with my coffee, all sweaty and transgressive. The stigmas surrounding women's bodies are powerful, but they're no match for how powerful I feel after running.
So brave.
Yesterday, when I stumbled upon this article, I had to read it like twice or three times to make sure it's not a joke, or to make sure that, come on, maybe I must have misread it. I mean, come on, it can't be that idiot. Oh, yes, it is. Oh, yes, it is.
You know, maybe the Guardian has a new satire column.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that, well, what a nice thing for the Guardian to do. They actually created a loons corner where they put a lot of satire so we can all have a laugh. But no, it was serious. And one of the ways to make sure it's serious is to look at the comments section and see the Guardian's pick, which is one of the two comments that actually agree with this article. So in all fairness, even Guardian readers are like, woman, you're fucking insane. So in all fairness to that, even the most left-wing, and yes, I do know the commentators, the frequent commentators at the Guardian. You can now understand how much I read the Guardian, and even those that I really know that they are the far left feminists, all the whole 9 yards with leftism, and even those ones were like, "Woman, you're fucking insane. Come on, get over yourself." So yeah.
So she had one experience where one woman made some comments that could be interpreted as disapproving, and then she goes on to this long rant about women being shamed for sweating and all that sort of stuff. It's just insane.
Yeah,
And she has a really, really thin skin.
Yeah, and if you look closely, I mean, it could be like, oh, you just look like you just did a class, or maybe you weren't swimming. I mean, she was trying to make
really
small talk.
thin, sweaty skin.
It's so thin, the sweat just leaks out. Nothing you can do about it.
I mean, seriously, the woman who at the what's the Starbucks, it looks like she was trying to make small talk. The kind of small talk that you usually do. I mean, I don't know, I do when I go to a bar or whatnot to buy coffee and what. Sometimes, or most of the cases, I do a bit of small talk, especially if I go alone.
Yeah, but of course we're not there in the situation. We made a lot of this sort of nuance comes across through body language and tone and so on. So we don't know about how that exactly happened. Maybe she was sort of looking derisively or something like that, or maybe it was a tone of her voice or something. But maybe this writer just misunderstood the intentions of this woman and totally overreacted.
And, in all fairness, even if she did not misunderstand, and even if that particular that particular individual was entirely disapproving and whatnot, I'm like, so fucking what? I mean, at the end of the day, she was sweating like a pig. And if it smells like crap, well, yes, you're going to get some disapproval. So fucking what? Get over yourself. Grab your coffee and get the fuck out.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of some people are sort of disturbed by people, sweating profusely in public and so on, and it's not just about women; it's also about men, and I don't know. It's just such a minor thing, and just blowing this up completely out of proportion.
It happened to me once or twice. I mean, let's not forget, I worked in the field in one period. I was climbing up pillars to connect remote areas to the internet. That's the kind of activity that creates sweatiness. And it happened to me once or twice in the years that I worked there. And usually I noticed it myself and get the fuck out of the premises and bring in new clothes after I washed myself. I mean, if someone would have told me something disapproving, once it was told to me quite discreetly that made you sweat it a bit, and I'm like, yes, you're right. Sorry, I'm going. Be right back, and essentially disappeared off the premises because I know it's uncivilized. Is it really that hard to ask for women to do the same?
Yeah, but we all know that equality means you're a misogynist.
Oh, fair enough. Fair enough. Yes, I guess. Much misogyny. Jesus fucking Christ. I'm thinking that if this is the standard for a Guardian column, I should probably create a fake female persona on the internet and eventually get myself published on the Guardian. I mean, if this is the standard, I could definitely publish more than once a week on the Guardian. Only if I start talking about the plethora of microaggressions that I've had throughout the year, let's say 2012, I could write 5 articles a day, Jessica Valenti style. Not a problem.
Yeah, maybe you just need a female pen name and a suitable backstory, and then you're in business.
You know what? I might actually try that. Don't say it too, don't say it too often, because I might actually. I heard they pay well for a column, so especially a comment is free column. Apparently, those are the best paid, because they obviously they attract the most views. So yeah, I might actually try that. Although I still haven't planned to get myself published on Everyday Feminism, because they pay $100 for every article.
Yeah, maybe you're a lesbian person of color, and you're an immigrant from some sort of African country, maybe. Then and have sort of some sort of harrowing background experience of um, being sexually abused or something like that, and then they just eat right out of your hand.
Yeah, well, I'll ask one of my. I have a guy from Senegal in my Facebook list, and I'm gonna ask him to show me what are the quirks of the Senegalese type of writing in English. I heard there are some quirks, and I'll just learn those, and then I'm gonna say that I am a Senegalese trans woman, or something like that. It should work, yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, there you go. Another J in the chat room that just went again on the Guardian and showed us the Guardian pic uh, on the comment section of this article with this sweat shaming. This kind of insidious behavior is why the world has less women interested in sports and fitness. There you go.
Yeah, it's fewer women. Thank you, Guardian.
Yep. Okay, enough of
Let's
this
go on to
nonsense.
something that is quite possibly even more insane.
Oh, okay.
It's a column on Spiegel by Sibylle Berg, who's a Swiss novelist and playwright who writes these insipid columns on Spiegel. And this one is entitled Hats Off to Volkswagen. This week, 4 male successors to Mr. Winterkorn were considered. How interesting. Certainly, Volkswagen would have also considered women for this post. But of course, it would have to be women with the same qualifications. Anything else would be absurd from the company's perspective. What the same qualifications means in business, or rather in all firms, or rather in all institutions of our culture, is usually this. You need to know people. The candidate needs to have already successfully ruined a few other companies. You need to have gone hunting together or to a brothel. You need to know each other from closed circles, boys' clubs. Qualifications are overrated, aren't they? Recently, the cultural theorist Klaus Teweleit said that boys' clubs had no inherent development without the regulating influence of women. They would merely lose themselves in pecking orders and brutality. But then you turn around and complain about the Islamic State, dear Volkswagen buddies. Watching the same shit over again makes me weary. This complete normality with which women are excluded from the leading positions of our society, and no, they rarely do it by themselves. They don't exclude themselves because they are too lazy, want to avoid conflict, or take no joy in power. Apropos, there's hardly any topic that riles up men more than demanding equal rights. The fear of losing any bit of what one has become accustomed to seems to send even the most reasonable person mad. But here, as with most impositions in life, it would help to breathe slowly into a bag decorated with funny pictures of squirrels, and to try to put oneself into the shoes of the source of one's annoyance. Good day, dear enraged reader. Imagine the world in which you lived were ruled by women. Not just by one Miss Merkel. It would be normal to find women everywhere, as bosses in firms or supervisory boards, as directors of hospitals and theaters. They would pass laws, they would decide over your sexuality. Are you allowed to refuse reproduction or not? But there'd be plans for a quota. 20% of men should maybe, someday, and so on. Meanwhile, you're afraid to go to the park at night because women are lying in wait for you in gangs because of their bodily strength. They plan to penetrate you with objects or body parts. You're afraid that your drink might be spiked. On every street corner you see men who are bought by women for fucking. Women check you out and make degrading comments. Completely normal since they learned that they are allowed to consume men as merchandise. Women like to say, "At home, my husband is boss." Family planning, education of children, all of that is up to him. You are proud of your housework, hardly surprising since you have nothing else to be proud of, and so on. And on that note, hats off to you, Volkswagen. Welcome to the future and good luck with the next male top manager who will be replaced by the next male top manager.
Did she just compare Volkswagen with the Islamic State?
Apparently.
This woman needs help. The kind of very fluffy room and in a nice jacket. that kind of help. No, seriously, this woman needs help. Poor dear. Jesus fucking Christ. I mean, I know Italy has shut down its psychiatric institutions, which has been a huge societal issue ever since. Did Germany also did that the same thing?
Yeah, apparently they let her out. But
if not, help should be on the way to this particular individual. Jesus fucking.
But she's apparently sort of quite a successful writer and sort of in the sort of circles of literati, she's sort of well respected, and for whatever reason, I've read several of her columns in the past, and it's a sort of thing that is not even wrong. It's just sort of hot air and incoherent assertions and nary an argument to be found.
No, at least this one is coherent. It reaches to a point. The problem is that the point is insane, and he uses completely inappropriate comparisons. I mean, seriously, comparing the management of Volkswagen with the Islamic State? I'm sorry, this woman needs help. As for the rest of the article, I'm like, really? For instance, that one, imagine that there is men for consumed and fuck. Well, there is such thing as male brothels in Germany. They do exist. Sure, there are not too many of them because the demand is smaller, but they do exist. They also exist in the Netherlands. They also exist in Czech Republic. They also exist in Spain. I mean, they do exist, believe it or not.
Yeah, and somehow I've never gotten around to be offended by that. I don't know why.
Neither do I. I am offended that they don't exist in Romania because prostitution is officially illegal, although in reality it's not really that illegal. But yeah, and somehow we haven't got around to be offended by that. And also, is she seriously advocating that at home the boss should be the husband?
No, I think with this sort of attitude, she wants to sort of mock the way that a lot of men talk in our society, that at home my wife is boss and so on, and
yeah, I understand that.
She wants to suggest that this is sort of nonsense and condescending and
No, it's not.
yeah.
But it's not condescending. In many cases, it's true. I don't like it, but I don't have to like it. Amazing. And also, yeah, this one I wanted to address. There should be women deciding legislation, aside from the fact that there already are. But this one should be allowed to refuse reproduction or not. Does she realize that men don't really have reproductive rights? Just saying.
Yeah, that's.
I mean, men really are not allowed to refuse reproduction.
I mean, men are allowed to use condoms and to get a vasectomy, but that's just it.
Yes, but they're not allowed to refuse reproduction post event like women are.
Yeah,
they're not allowed to refuse the responsibility. So, and I'm not saying necessarily they should. I am saying though that her comparison is insane and completely parallel with reality.
I mean, she's basically complaining that men are deciding these sorts of issues, which they are, but they have decided for the most part in favor of women. So,
yeah. Yeah, you were correct. It's even more insane than the sweat streaming. I mean, the sweat shaming one was just trivial nonsense, but this one, oh come
Yeah, it's like
on.
so this company hires a male CEO and suddenly that's the end of the world.
Yeah, and on one hand, she is correct. She has a point when she says, "Well, the most of the so-called qualifications are about you have to know people and whatnot." Yeah, that's true, but I don't see how that's a problem.
Yeah, though I do think that she sort of very much overstates the case. I mean, yeah, you need to know the right people, but you also need to be actually really competent and put in a lot of work to get into these kinds of positions.
Yes, absolutely. Not
It's
to
not enough
mention,
just to be a sociable fellow
mhm,
and be liked by everyone. That's not going to cut it at the upper echelons of business.
yes, and I don't know how it's particularly at Volkswagen, but in many companies, the CEO is usually elected from the pool of the of this what's called in English stockholders, or essentially the board, who are usually stockholders as well. They actually own shares of the company. Uh, Many corporations do that. So, I mean, you can end up a shareholder even if you don't know the right people. If you can work enough to afford to buy slowly and end up
Yeah.
in the board, you don't have to know people. So there are ways to go around the so-called nepotism, which I don't think there's too much of it. It's significantly overstated. Yeah, sure, there is some nepotism, but not nearly as much as this author tries to suggest.
Yeah, and also what I find sort of infuriating about this article is um, that she sort of mentions some of the sort of popular counter arguments to her position, but she just mentions them and just dismisses them as being apparently obviously absurd, like uh, like the idea um, that there aren't as many top female managers because women avoid conflict or don't take as much joy in power and or
Hmm.
something like that. Well, yeah, you it's not enough to just state the objection. You also have to refute it. But
Yeah.
no, that's beneath her dignity.
Yeah, I think she imagines herself in one big tower without the fluffy room, unfortunately, and the proper jacket. And she's like, let's issue some edicts from here because, and the poor plebs can deal with smaller nonsense like actually refuting arguments and things like that.
Yeah, and this whole idea that somehow this scandal that Volkswagen with the emissions thing where they cheated and so on, that this is somehow because there was a man at the helm. That's just quite absurd. I mean, almost all companies that have male CEOs, so whenever there's such a scandal, that's a very high chance of a man being at the helm and a very high chance of a man being the next to take that office. That's not anything unusual, and it's not like
Then, by that standard, the private data leak that happened at Yahoo happened because there was a woman at the helm.
yeah, and I mean
I know it sounds insane, but hey, I didn't come up with this argument.
and it's not like Mr. Winterkorn was some sort of horrible CEO which just was a complete failure. You know, um, up, um, this sort of scandal with the emissions. That is basically the one bad thing about his tenure, and it's a huge bad thing. But apart from that, he was extremely successful, and so just
And as far as I understand, the problem is actually quite old, so he might as well have inherited it and didn't know about it. Because, there is another thing that many people don't understand about large corporations. It's rarely the case that the CEO knows everything about everything to in every detail. You can't. In
yeah,
such
it's
a
impossible.
large company, you can't. It's not like running, I don't know, let's say, a good family friend of mine has a network of 6 stores in 2 cities in Romania. Yes, he does know everything there is to know about all the 6 stores, but it's completely different at a Volkswagen level when you have factories on 3 continents, South America, Europe, and Asia. And when you have designers living on 3 or 4 continents, you can't actually know everything there is to know. I mean, it's totally possible that some of the details were not known to the big boss. Now, of course, the big boss is still going to be sacrificed for this, as it makes sense from all perspectives. But it is very likely that some of the things he may not even know, because it's impossible. That's the problem with large corporations. They become entities in and of themselves, independent of the owners and even the big bosses.
Yeah, and they become very bureaucratic because you just can't run some sort of very large organization any other way, because you do have to have these um, fixed rules of conduct, and you have to have these large, expansive hierarchies, and often you do get this sort of problem where problems are just written out, and people aren't communicating with each other as they should, because they're passing along the blame, and they don't want to be the one who's holding the bag of goods at the end, and that can be quite a problem, as it is in state bureaucracies.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, bureaucracy is bad in and of itself. It doesn't matter if it's state bureaucracy or private bureaucracy. They're still inefficient because that's what the bureaucracy does best.
Yeah, but so if you want to have these very large organizations, they need to be bureaucratic. So that's sort of just the cost you have to pay for these. If you want to run these very large corporations, of course, also have benefits. The brand recognition, all sorts of economies of scale that you get from having a large corporation.
Yeah, I'm not saying that there shouldn't be. I'm saying that it's to be expected from very large organizations, whether it's state organizations or private organizations. It's just expected, these kinds of bureaucratic fuck-ups. And to blame it all on the CEO, it's and it seems that the more collectivist-minded of us are able to understand that when, for instance, let's say someone in a village is being beaten by a policeman and everyone blames the president for it. The more collectivists among us are able to understand that, come on, the president can't know what happens in every single police station around a big country. Yet when it happens to a private corporation, the same individuals are completely unable to understand that it's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah, but I don't think that's an entirely fair comparison, because this is not just like one small localized incident that happened at Volkswagen. It's a much bigger thing, and it's a sort of thing that the CEO, if he didn't know, he probably should have known, and yeah. So I think it's very reasonable that he has to go.
Yeah, I'm not saying you. Yeah, sure. Okay, let's go to the next one.
On to the next one. This one is also from Spiegel, and a bit of backstory on this is we've sort of talked about it a little bit in the past. This case of Jörg Kachelmann, who was a kind of well-known weatherman on German TV. And then in 2011, he was accused of rape by his former girlfriend, and there was this sort of there was a lot of public attention on this trial. There was this large-scale media smear campaign on him, led especially by the Axel Springer Verlag, which and especially the Bild newspaper, which is the largest paper in that publishing house, and also I think still the largest paper overall in Germany. And he was in the end acquitted, and now he's sort of suing all sorts of people who who slandered him, and apparently now he has won a suit against Springer, which is what this article is about. Record damages. Springer has to pay 635,000 euros to Kachelmann. Talks about a settlement had broken down. The State Court of Cologne had ruled on Wednesday that the Springer Corporation has to pay damages to the tune of 635,000 euros to Jörg Kachelmann. This is the highest sum that has hitherto been awarded to the plaintiff in such a suit. Originally, Kachelmann had even demanded 2.25 million. In 2011, the weatherman was cleared of the charge of rape, and an ex-lover had accused him back then. In a press release, the State Court wrote that Kachelmann had been, quote, violated in his privacy, his right to informational self-determination, and his right in his own image to the revelation of details of his sexual life, to the partial publication of his text messages and emails, and the publication of photos that showed him, for example, during yard exercise in a penal institution. End quote. The courts saw no justified public interest in this. Moreover, the print and online reports had led to pre-conviction of Kachelmann. Because of this reporting, Kachelmann had been lastingly stigmatized as a, quote, violent misogynist. However, the court did not recognize the existence of, quote, a press campaign of several publishers which the plaintiff alleged. The verdict continues. Against the backdrop of the basically existing competition between the different publishers, the reciprocal citing of commentary does not constitute sufficient evidence for a planned and coordinated attack on the plaintiff. End quote. The state of Cologne recognized a total of 38 cases of aggravated libel in several Springer publications. The court sentenced Axel Springer SE to a payment of 335,000 euros and the Bild GmbH and Co. KG to a payment of 300,000 euros. And I think it goes on a bit after that, but that is basically the most important part.
Well, the court is correct. The fact that they referenced each other is not sufficient evidence of collusion and coordination.
Yeah, I think they're right in that, and I think that part of the allegation was probably false and certainly not enough evidence for them.
I'm thinking of the. And maybe the parallel is not entirely appropriate or entirely consistent, but it's an imperfect analogy. I'm thinking of Gamergate. When Gamergate first emerged, it alleged a corruption and collusion within the media, and most of the skeptical voices, including myself, was thinking, well, yes, they do kind of sound the same, but on the other hand, they do recite each other. That's not necessarily an evidence that they colluded with each other. They may just well compete against each other for more clicks because it's obviously a big scandal that can lead to a lot of views and therefore a lot of shekels for them. And then, of course, the mail list emerged and obvious evidence of collusion emerged. And then, of course, okay, so this time actually it was collusion. But in this case, and same in this case, I mean, yeah, maybe they did publish almost in the same period of time and pretty much the same garbage and whatnot. And I understand that he felt targeted and whatnot, but that's not sufficient evidence that it was collusion. Maybe it was, but it's not sufficient.
Yeah, a lot of time, sort of uncoordinated action, facing the same kind of incentives. Looks like it is coordinated. As for example, if you look at a swarm of fish or a school of fish or whatever that's called, or a swarm of birds, the way they sort of move often looks like there has to be someone coordinating that, but no, it's actually just every animal just following the same kinds of signals, and then you get this behavior which looks very coordinated but actually isn't.
Yeah. And yeah, so maybe it was not collusion after all, or maybe it was, but just pointing to the appearance of collusion is definitely not sufficient evidence. On the other hand, it shows that what you said earlier, that you can't really get too big reparations. I mean, he gets 600,000 euros, which is already the largest ever, if I understood correctly from your article.
Yep.
I mean, he probably would have gotten a lot more in Britain.
Yeah, and I mean the attacks on him were really, really vicious, and uh, even after he had actually been cleared by the court, there were still people calling him a rapist and so on, and um, our old friend Ali Schwarz was also among the foremost of his unappointed prosecutors in the court of public opinion. Wrote some really vicious columns about him.
Yeah, well, it's good that the ones who perpetrated uh, who sold such lies to the public are at least held somehow accountable. And no, before anyone jumps off the shark, no, I don't think it is free speech to be able to lie as much as uh, to viciously attack and lie about someone, uh, especially after the court has cleared them. That's knowingly lying and knowingly being and purposefully being an a-hole. That kind of thing should have some consequences.
Yeah, I mean it's not necessarily knowingly lying because it wasn't like the allegations of his accused had
You're
been
right. You're right. Knowingly
completely
committing a libel.
disproven. It's just even like the statement that the court made is they sort of in particular emphasize that they don't actually know if he's guilty or not, and um, yeah, I mean
Yeah, that's the problem. You're always found not guilty, not innocent.
yeah, I mean in this particular case, I think he's probably innocent, but we just don't really know. There were a lot of problems with the sort of inconsistencies with um, the statements made by the alleged victim. Um, so that leads me to believe that he's probably innocent. Give it maybe 90% or something like that, but still we don't know.
Yeah, yeah, you're right. I should have phrased it knowingly committing libel. Because, there are, even with the libel laws, I don't know how exactly the laws are in Germany, but, in most countries, the libel laws do leave rooms for interpretation in the sense that, well, when you have a justification of public interest, or when at the moment of writing you did not really know entirely that you were committing libel, and you erred on the side of, okay, let's print it anyway, even if we're not entirely sure. And in some countries such as France, for instance, you get let off the hook if you can prove that.
Yeah, I'm not exactly sure on how exactly that works in Germany, but yeah, I mean a lot of these articles did definitely cross the line. So
Now, I'm
uh,
using the example of Dominique Strauss-Kahn. Dominique Strauss-Kahn did attempt to sue the media in France, and only won one of the trials. He launched like five or six. He only won one of them against a particularly nasty left-wing tabloid. But otherwise, he lost the other ones because the journalists were like, look, we did not entirely know what was happening when we printed that particular thing. And the rest of the articles that we printed after the ones accused by Mr. Strauss-Kahn show a lot more reservations and a lot more moderation. But when the first story first emerged, things weren't entirely clear, and we erred on the side of let's publish them anyway because it's in the public interest, and that's how they were let off the hook, even though. Uh,
yeah, I mean that seems reasonable to me. You
mhm.
want um, to apply freedom of press in the sort of most broad way that's
Yes.
reasonable, and you want
Yes.
to err on the side of allowing potentially libelous things to be published rather than punishing
hmm
people for
hmm
doing that.
hmm Yeah, yeah, I do agree. That's why I think it was reasonable what the French courts have decided, and I think the same could be true in Germany. But you say that they were particularly nasty, so I think the court may have gotten it right. Although I don't know if this amount will suffice to fix all the damages, because I don't know who's gonna employ this guy again on TV.
Yeah, probably not on TV. I mean, I think he has some sort of new weather service that's like online, and I don't know, and Also, I read another article that sort of said that the whole costs for his lawyers and so on, he was basically broke and often had sort of trouble paying for groceries and so on. So this man's life is still sort of more or less ruined from this this trial.
Yeah, so I don't know. I don't know if this amount will cover all that. Probably not.
Yeah, probably not.
Depressing story. But yeah, I
Let's
guess
move on to another depressing story.
Oh no, yeah, this one. Okay, depressing story number 2. Coming from the Daily Mail. Kind, funny, and bright student 17 hanged himself after being falsely accused of rape and finding it difficult to cope with the investigation. A bright teenager took his own life after he was falsely accused of rape, an inquest has heard. Jay Cheshire, 17, who was mature and well-liked, was at the center of a police investigation when he was accused of rape. The investigation ended 2 weeks later in June this year when the alleged victim dropped the allegation. But just weeks after that, vulnerable and sensitive Jay was found hanging in a park in Southampton. He was rushed to the city's general hospital but died 2 days later on July 5. An inquest at Winchester Coroner's Court, Hampshire, heard Jay struggled to cope with the false accusation and was absolutely distraught. The court also heard he had a history of having a low mood, was put on antidepressants, and was due to undergo cognitive behavior therapy. He had a psychiatrist since the age of 13, but in March this year his state of mind improved, leading to doctors agreeing that CBT was not urgently needed anymore. However, in May, Jay's family contacted them once more, saying he was under pressure because of the police investigation. On June 24, just over a week before he died, he told psychiatrists at the Orchard Center in Southampton that the investigation was over and he was expecting to find work. When police arrived at the scene, they found Jay had left a note. He has also left a note for his family and one in his sixth form locker. Central Hampshire senior coroner Graham Short recorded a verdict of suicide and said he struggled to cope with the false accusations and the investigation. He said, quote, "I got the impression he was well-liked and mature in some ways, but was a sensitive young man and vulnerable in some respects, and he found it difficult to cope with the police investigation." Jay's mom, Karen Cheshire, 54, said that the allegation was a factor in his death and that the alleged victim said he was a sex offender. Speaking about the alleged victim, she said, quote, "She accused him of rape and said he was a sex offender. He was absolutely distraught. 2 weeks later, she said she withdrew the allegations." And the article goes a bit more, but yeah, we got the gist. Meanwhile, the alleged victim, I guess, is going to have a vacation in Spain or something. I mean, £10,000 is quite a decent amount of money to win. Make no mistake, I'm sure she actually got that money. I mean, in the past you had to make a separate application for it, but now usually the police fill it out for you, so you don't have to work like at all to cash in on false allegations. So I'm guessing the alleged victim is now preparing for a vacation. Maybe not in Spain, maybe in Cyprus or some other sunny place.
And meanwhile, the actual victim is dead.
Yeah, and meanwhile, the actual victim is dead. Again, why doesn't Britain have... I mean, in other cases, in other situations, in other crimes that don't involve false rape allegations, if the actions lead to the suicide of the victim, that constitutes aggravating circumstance in a criminal trial. Shouldn't this be the case here too?
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, it's not correct to just say that he killed himself because this allegation, but it's always obviously more than just one cause there. Also, it's not in the part that you've read, but in this article, also talk about him being depressed before this incident happened. So
yeah,
it's
there
not
were
like
some mental health issues. Yes.
Yeah.
This was most likely the tipping point.
Yeah.
Rather than the entire cause. Yes, absolutely, I agree. But still, I mean, at the very least, there should be, I don't know, let's say the alleged victim should pay the money back to the taxpayers, maybe with some interest on top of it. There should be some consequences for these kinds of situations.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, you know how it is. There's this, argument that if we do that, then women will be afraid of coming
I
forward and
don't
so
care.
on. And,
I don't care. They will still be alive.
yeah.
I mean, seriously. Because, yeah, again, I don't believe that, I don't fall into that emotional trap of, oh, but rape is worse than murder. No, it isn't. I have yet to hear someone recovering from being murdered. So, no, sorry, I'm not buying that. Amazing, amazing. Okay, too depressing. Let's get to the next one.
Okay, next one is yet again from Der Spiegel. Young women in the East. Only 41% want an equal partnership. The traditional model of gender roles, according to which the man is the main breadwinner and the woman earns little or nothing, is desired by fewer and fewer Germans. That is the result of a representative study by the Federal Ministry of Families, for which more than 3,000 men and women were surveyed. According to a report of Der Spiegel, one of the findings is that 43% of West German and 55% of East German respondents want a partnership where both are working and share childcare and housework between them. But among East German women between the ages of 18 and 39, the study's authors report a, quote, re-traditionalization impetus, end quote, while 68% of young men desire an equal partnership, only 41% of East German women concur. Among women over 40, that proportion is significantly higher, 61%. With close to 60%, young women in West Germany are also far above their Eastern peers. In an interview with the Spiegel, Federal Minister of Families Manuela Schwesig of the SPD denies the existence of an about turn in the East. Quote, I don't see any retrogression there. I see it as a form of freedom that women and men in East Germany can nowadays decide whether they want to work full-time or part-time. Reconciling work and the family wasn't easy. Quote, all working parents know the feeling of never having enough time for their family. I too am familiar with this inner turmoil. Nevertheless, it was possible for both parents to have a career. Maybe not at the same time and not with the same intensity, but it's possible. It depended on what field one worked in and how replaceable one was, Schwesig said. So it's a sort of an interesting study in that that it is especially women who want this sort of more traditional distribution of roles, which again sort of supports the idea that equality would be a step backwards for most women.
You think? Yeah, I'm not surprised at all. This is true in every country that has been through communism. Uh, a lot more emphasis on a lot more. It's for the sake of the argument, let's call it traditional, although it's not really that traditional. But let's call it traditional, yeah. This erring on the side of so-called tradition is a lot more prevalent where communism has been. And mind you, this is not just true in Europe. For instance, uh, if you are to ask, and there are already emerging some sort of data from the very small period when this was allowed. If you compare North Korea with South Korea, North Korea is a lot more family traditionalist than South Korea. So this is particularly true wherever communism existed or still exists. It tends to actually make the family slightly stronger, especially after it falls out, than where there was no recent totalitarianism. And that's particularly funny because communism usually goes against the family, yet somehow that effect doesn't translate into actual reality. That policy doesn't translate into actual reality.
Well, that is interesting, but I'm not really sure if that is true in East Germany because, for example, marriage rates are lower in East Germany than they are in West Germany,
Mm-hmm.
um, as an example. And we've always sort of had the impression that you had less traditional gender roles in East Germany than in West Germany for the most part. So I don't know that.
Yeah, but then again, you're comparing marriage rates with individuals who have lived under communism. Well, from my understanding, they were now asking people who either didn't live at all under communism or only lived for a few years. It was
Yeah.
people 1839, right?
Hmm.
So that means the oldest of the individuals there would have been like, what, 10, 11 when the wall came down?
Well,
About.
it's 25 years ago.
Yeah, it's 26 to be more fair, almost 20. Yeah, 26 actually. It's October already. So yeah, the oldest of that group surveyed would have been 13 when the wall came down. So it's the post-communist generation essentially, and just like in Russia, in Russia, women over 40 are far less traditionalist than women who are in their 20s right now.
Yeah, and I mean that's sort of also what the study found that older women are a lot less traditionalist
Yes.
than their daughters, basically.
Yeah, and what I'm saying is I'm not surprised at all. This seems to be quite a consistent trend. The same is true here, same is true in Poland, same was true in Ukraine. I don't know how true it is now because they're busy with war. Uh, Same is true in Serbia. So I'm not surprised. I don't know why this is happening, but I'm not surprised it exists. It seems to be quite a consistent trend wherever communism has been. It may just be because the kids tend to rebel against their parents. It may be just that. It could be a very innocuous explanation.
That might be the case. Maybe there's a sort of oscillation where one generation is sort of traditionalist, next is progressive, the next one is traditionalist again, and so
Yeah,
on. Maybe that's a sort of cycle going on here.
yeah. It could be just. I don't know. But it could be. It could be just as an innocuous. Because to be fair, we see that in some Western countries as well, where the younger generation is a lot more conservative on a lot more issues than their parents.
Yeah. One thing I'm definitely surprised about is how reasonable the comments of Manuel Schwesig are here.
Why
Um,
is this individual usually messed up?
well, I mean, she's the minister um, for families, which is the ministry for um, women, families,
The Ministry Against Men. Yes,
seniors,
yes,
and
yes,
youth. So basically, the ministry against men.
yes, yes,
And
yes.
yeah, so seeing her make this pretty reasonable comments, I think is a good sign and a positive surprise. That yeah, this is not necessarily a bad thing. It's just people making choices, and yeah, that's very reasonable.
Yeah, it is reasonable, and uh, this particular difference, I don't know. Yeah, it is an expression of freedom. I mean, at the end of the day, in East Germany, just like in everywhere else in Eastern Europe, you were kind of forced to go to work, and you didn't have much of a career because you were assigned work by the state for the most part. Now, sure, if you were living in Berlin or Warsaw, you had some leeway, but most people didn't live in Berlin or Warsaw, so. um, so yeah, you're pretty much assigned. You didn't have enough freedom, and once that becomes possible, obviously people will express themselves in different ways. So yeah, it's not really. It is a reasonable comment. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's always this sort of idea that if you're not in if you if you're not in favor of, splitting up income work and housework 50-50, then that's an unequal relationship. It's
No, it's true. It is unequal, but that doesn't mean it's bad.
I mean, yeah, I guess it's a relationship where you have different roles, but not necessarily unequal in the sense that one partner is more important than the other, or one is has a higher status than the other. That's not necessarily the case.
Yeah, it's not necessarily the case, but again, even if it were the case, if it's voluntary and it works for them, who am I to judge?
Yeah.
Yeah, but then again, I guess it's more customary amongst politicians to try to judge these kinds of things because they're very busy in general, and as such, they're very keen on judging these aspects. Okay, let's go to the next and the last one, which is your finding.
Okay, this is from Science Mag. Dutch sexism study comes under fire. Is being a woman a disadvantage when you're applying for grant money in the Netherlands? Yes, say the authors of a paper published by the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, or PNAS, this week. The study showed that women have a lower chance than men of winning early career grants from the Netherlands Organization for Scientific Research, or NWO, the country's main grant agency. NWO, which commissioned the study, accepted the results and announced several changes on Monday to rectify the problems. Quote, NWO will devote more explicit attention to the gender awareness of reviewers in its methods and procedures, the statement said. But several Dutch scientists who have taken a close look at the data say they see no evidence of sexism. The PNAS paper, written by Romy van der Lee and Naomi Ellemers of Leiden University Institute of Psychology, is an example of a classic statistical trap, says statistician Casper Albers of the University of Groningen, who tore the paper apart in a blog post yesterday. Albers says he plans to send the piece as a commentary to PNAS as well. Van der Lee and Ellemers analyzed 2,823 applicants for NWO's Veni grants for young researchers in the years 2010, 2011, and 2012. Overall, women had a success rate of 14.9% compared with 17.7% for men, they wrote, and that difference was statistically significant. But Albers says the difference evaporates if you look more closely at sex ratios and success rates in NWO's 9 scientific disciplines. Those data, which Van der Lee and LMS provided in the supplement to their paper, show that women simply apply more often in fields where the chances of success are low. For instance, women accounted for 51 and 49% of the applications in medical science and social engineering and social sciences, respectively. As it happens, those fields had the lowest overall success rates, 14.9% and 13.4% respectively, within NWO. By contrast, women made up only 12% of the applicants in physics, where the overall success rate is highest, at 26.3%. All in all, men outperformed women in 5 of the 9 disciplines, women did better in 4. But in none of the disciplines is the difference statistically significant. Albers writes. He says the study is an example of Simpson's paradox. The statistical phenomenon that an aggregated set of data looks different when it is broken down. As it happens, the most famous example of the paradox concerned academic gender bias as well. In the 1970s, the University of California, Berkeley, was sued because its graduate school admission policies seemed biased against women, but an analysis published in Science in 1975 showed that none of Berkeley's faculties were biased. Women had much lower overall success rates because they applied more often at faculties that were harder to get into. I'm surprised that the authors, the reviewers, and the editors of the PNAS paper didn't see this, Albers says. You don't have to be all that knowledgeable about statistics to spot this problem. LMS, who recently moved to Utrecht University, says she and Van der Lee were fully aware of the picture were fully aware that the picture looked different when broken down by discipline, and that the paper elaborates on these differences. The overall success rates quote, were seen as a problem by NWO and were the starting point for our analysis, says LMS, who's, quote, not convinced that Simpson's paradox invalidates the findings. The overall figures aren't the most important finding anyway, she says. The paper looked at other aspects of the application process in more detail, including NWO's instruction and the evaluation materials, which they found to contain gendered language favoring male applicants. The critics decided to focus on one statistical test and burn down the entire story based on that, she says. But several other scientists agree with Albert's conclusion that there's no evidence of sexism. Quote, an accusation of sexism, especially if it's institutional, has to be made very cautiously. Daniel Lekens of Eindhoven University of Technology and Rolf Hood of the Delft University of Technology wrote in a letter published in the Dutch newspaper De Volkskrant this morning. That didn't happen here. And Lakens and Hunt aren't claiming there's no sexism in science, and the profession needs more diversity, Hunt emphasized in an email to Science Insider. But you don't advance that good cause by accusing institutes of sexism based on incorrect conclusions, he writes. Even if you do accept the researchers' methodology, Albert says, they have a weak case. The difference between male and female success rates is small, and with a p-value of 0.045, the effect is barely significant. What's more, women have bested men in years and not included in this analysis. For instance, in the 2015 round of Winnie grants announced in August, women had a 14.9 success rate versus 13.9 for men. Quote, sometimes women do better, sometimes men, as you would expect, Albert says. That's how chance works. A spokesperson for NWO referred Science Insider's question about the PNAS paper to the authors, but said the organization will go ahead with its reforms because they're a good idea, regardless of the paper's quality. Among other things, NWO is planning a pilot experiment to see whether additional training for reviewers can improve women's success rates. Isn't science wonderful?
We'll go ahead with the ideas anyway, because they're good, regardless of the quality. Translation from Dutch to English, screw the facts. It feels good.
Yeah, why did they do the study in the first place? If they're just going to go ahead with this program anyway.
Mean Gene in the chat room. PNAS is an example of the patriarchy.
Most definitely.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Why did they do the study in the first place? I mean, if they're planning to do these quote-unquote reforms, then why not just do them anyway without wasting the resources on a study that eventually turned out to be flawed, or at least, I mean, the data maybe was good, but the way the conclusions were framed were completely flawed, if we are to believe it. I didn't take a look at the study, but I tend to believe this Albers guy, because it's not the first time. I mean, it would not be a surprise at all. I've seen other studies going into the same, doing exactly the same thing. Very recently, just a month ago, with a study claimed by the feminists in here, who are claiming that there is such an oppression in the workforce and whatnot in this country. And then when I asked for sources, they gave me sources, but they had only read the first page. Because if they had scrolled down to the, I don't know, let's say the 10th page, they would have noticed that once you break down the data per fields, the so-called oppression and bias is actually more or less non-existent. So yeah. As for this argument that but we looked into more detail, including instruction and evaluation material, and they contained gendered language. Well, I'm sorry, but Dutch is an Indo-European language. As such, it's a gendered language. I fail to see how that's an issue. I mean, what are you going to do? Change the Dutch language entirely?
Yeah, and I mean, they're not even just as far as I read that. There was one article on the same study on I think the National Review in America, where they've
In Canada,
I
to be fair.
Canada?
Yeah, National Review is Canadian.
Is it?
Yes.
Really?
Yes.
Okay, if you say so. Um, where they said that some of these words were like successful and really innocuous words like that. Let me see if I can find this thing. Go ahead and talk for a minute.
Yeah. Well, National Review is indeed Canadian. I checked again. I mean, do you remember at the ICMI 14 when we had the Miss Barbara talk, and she writes for National Review, and she flew from Canada to Detroit to hold her lecture. As for the analysis provided by sciencemag.org, this Albers guy seems to be correct, because this kind of thing happens all the time. For instance, in one of my older articles on AVFM, I compared gender pay gap studies made by the European Commission, which on the front page they would seem to support the feminist assertions, but the study was usually 150 pages long, and once you would start actually reading it, you would have noticed that far from the image of Europe-wide oppression of women in the workforce, things were a little bit more nuanced and a little bit less on the feminist line of thinking. And again, this gendered language still kills me, because this is the kind of claim that is done consistently. You, Jon, brought in the past examples of such criticism. I think it was in Austria, and it happens also in Norway, now in the Netherlands, routinely in Spain, routinely in France. I mean, sorry, but have you considered that maybe, just maybe, it's a feature of the Indo-European languages to be, to sound gendered, although in many cases it's just respecting the Latin masculine neuter rule. Sorry, it's not really such a huge issue.
Yeah, I mean it's not just in the European languages, but really most languages in general are gendered.
Yeah, most languages in general are gendered, but the Indo-European one, the one spoken in Europe and of course in South America, they do respect the rule coming from Latin masculine neuter, in the sense that if you want to talk about something in general, you're going to use the masculine form, because they rarely do have a neutral, something like with successful, for instance. Although successful in Neo-Latin languages is not gendered at all. Maybe it is in Dutch. But yeah, and if that is really the biggest problem, then maybe you shouldn't be applying for becoming a successful academician in the first place.
Or it wasn't successful, it was challenging and excellent,
Yeah,
apparently. I'll put the
yeah.
link in the chat.
Okay, so what? I mean, if the fact that they say excellent makes you less willing to apply, or discourages you or something, maybe, just maybe, you're not cut out to be a successful academician.
Maybe, but that would be sexist.
No, seriously, I mean, I can't think of a normal woman who is good at physics. I had some classmates who were good at physics. Some of them do research in physics nowadays. And I can't think of them being discouraged because it says excellent instead of a female form on some application. I can't imagine those tough girls being discouraged by that. I mean, these kinds of things. Oh, wow, it was gendered language. This sounds quite misogynistic, to be fair.
And maybe, just maybe, people who can be scared of by such language should be.
Yeah.
Maybe we don't need those people.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But then again, overall, it sounds to me like a very misogynistic claim. I mean, women are so fragile that they can be discouraged for what they allegedly been dreaming for their entire lives. because of a gendered word. I mean, people say that I'm a misogynist, but I really think women are stronger than that.
Yeah.
Yeah, as for the broader lesson of this article is probably this one. Always look more closely on the aggregate data because people in the non-feminist sector sometimes do make this mistake too, of falling into this paradox.
Yeah, I mean that's a mistake made by people across the political spectrum, across the ideological spectrum. It's when you see a study that sort of supports the beliefs that you already have, you don't really look very closely, and you just read the abstract, and then you get a sort of a warm glow of satisfaction because now your views are scientifically sound and science is behind you, and
Yeah, and if you have
and
a
you,
link that ends with nhi.gov, then uh, there you go, the debate is over.
yeah, and who wants to read that long study anyway?
Yeah, yeah. To be fair, I usually apply, that thing called common sense. I mean, do the findings are at least in part aligned with what I regard as common sense? If not, then I will 100% of the cases will look to the aggregate data. If they do, I'll check the data. I don't know, in maybe 70% of the cases.
Yeah, the problem with that is what you regard as being in line with common sense, of course, reflects your own beliefs about the world and your own ideological ideological commitments and so on. And of course, most other people will also um, have probably a sort of similar heuristic that if something sounds like it's like it makes sense, you don't question it further. You just accept it, and only if the claim of a study goes against your own beliefs, then you investigate further. And that's I'm not saying this is a criticism. It's just how the way that most people work, and it's
Yeah,
perfectly
that
natural. But
that
it
led me to
does.
change my mind on certain topics.
Yeah, yeah, definitely.
Particular standard, because then again I apply it consistently. I mean, if I'm going to start looking at the data and it still sounds good regardless of my opinion, then I'm going to start trying to change my opinion or finding out a bit more. But then again, for instance, when it's a study claiming that p- children who are raised by an intact family tended to fare far better than children raised by a single parent family or by a lesbian family. Uh, I think that kind of sounds commonsensical. However, if a study emerges that says that I don't know, threesome lesbian tranny families are by far the most successful model out there, that's something that sounds totally against my common sense, and I'll definitely investigate further. So I guess that kind of makes me a bit open-minded, after all.
Yeah, it's but there's still this sort of idea, which is, I guess, perfectly reasonable. That if something agrees with your world, you don't look very closely, but if it disagrees with you, then you start to find flaws, which is, perfectly reasonable. But it still leads to people having systematically biased beliefs.
And not only that, but it can indeed sometimes um, how should I put it? It can sometimes um, lead individuals to support something that may indeed be true, but using false data. For
Yeah.
instance, there was a study which has recently been debunked about prison wardens and female prison wardens and male inmates. It is true that most of the sexual assaults on male prison inmates is committed by female wardens, but it's not true in all cases. It's just true in the cases of juvenile prisons. But, you know, an initial study claimed that it was true even in some adult prisons, which wasn't actually true.
It sounds really surprising. That would be really surprising to me. I would imagine that that assaults by other inmates would be far more common than that.
Yeah. But no, apparently in juvenile prisons, the female guards are the main perpetrators, followed, of course, by other inmates. Now, of course, you can now argue that, well, some of the incidents between inmates don't get reported, which is true, but given what is reported and what we know, that's how it is. But again, the initial study had reported that that was true even in some adult prisons, which was totally bullshit.
Yeah, but getting back to this Dutch paper, sort of from what the authors say in their defense, it sort of sounds like the study may have been sort of taken out of context, or that they produced a study which maybe did not make this sort of claim that, you know, here's a study that proves that this grant selection was sexist. Maybe they made a much more nuanced point, and then there's some people who had this particular agenda just took this particular snippet from the study and ran with that. So maybe the fault lies not so much in the authors of that study, but more in the people who read this particular message and wanted to hear that very much.
Maybe, although if we are to look closely at the quotes, it says, well, the overall success rates were seen as a problem by NWO and were the starting point for our analysis. So essentially, the NWO who commissioned the study were like, look, we're seeing this difference in success rates, and please study this. So they were essentially given a party line. And then again, one of the authors says is not convinced that Simpson's paradox invalidates the findings, and that's essentially addressing a straw man, because the critics don't say that it invalidates the findings. It just says that the conclusion used is not nuanced enough and really not that much of a big problem. Then it doesn't say that their data is necessarily wrong.
Yeah. So from this, it looks like sort of the main problem lies with this with NWO, which starts with the assumption that there's a sexist problem, and then gets this study which seemingly seems to support its view and says, yeah, that proves that we need to do something, and then this point is sort of refuted, and then they say, well, we still need to do something, and.
So yeah, it may indeed be true that the activists here are the NWO and less the authors of the study. But then again, I didn't take a look at the paper, and I don't think I will, since I don't speak Dutch. I mean, I can read some Dutch text, but definitely not academic level and statistical studies.
Yeah.
I don't think I can do that. Well,
I think that about exhausts the topic.
Yep. I think that's pretty much it. Well, we've been going on for what, an hour and 45? Yeah, that would be enough for this week. Yeah. Well, I don't have anything else to add. So, some final messages?
I do have one final message. Take the red pill.
Take the red pill. Goodbye, everyone. Mr. Huff, take us out.